Hi, everyone. My name is Atiyyah Khan, and I'm an arts journalist based in Cape Town, covering and writing about music and culture in South Africa. And today we are joined by some incredible panelists. I'm very honored to be able to be hosting this session. And I will do an introduction shortly. But before I go into it, I just wanted to thank a few people before we get the session started. We'd just like to thank the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the Center for Creative Arts, the University of Johannesburg Arts and Culture, UKZN for Jazz and Popular Music, and the South African Association for Jazz Education. So joining us today, we will be chatting about the effects of COVID-19 on jazz festivals, venues, events around South Africa. And for that, we have um, some people who run festivals and some people who are working independently. So we have Billy Domingo, who runs the Cape Town International Jazz Festival. Welcome, Billy. We have Mantwa Chinoamadi from the Joy of Jazz Festival in Johannesburg. Alan Webster from the National Youth Jazz Festival. And Marlyn Knol, who is an independent promoter and also hosts and organizes various gigs based in Durban, and Nikki Froneman, who is also an organizer of gigs and tours and works with a lot of musicians and runs her own management company. So welcome, everybody. I know that times are tough. It is a holiday and we should all be enjoying it. Happy Freedom Day to everyone out there as well. So I'm going to go get right into it because we have a lot of questions planned, and I want you to feel as comfortable as possible in terms of speaking to each other. So just to make sure we get the main essence of this down, which is that we haven't seen each other for a while. As somebody who goes to a lot of gigs and goes to a lot of festivals, I would probably be looking forward to many of your events as some of my highlights for the year. So I wanted to find out as a starting point, and I'm going to ask each of you in order. How has the pandemic or COVID affected your work or your festival, not only this year, but from the start last year? And Willie, I'm going to start with you because I remember it was a bit touch and go with last year. The Cape Town International Jazz Festival was one of the first to be very affected. And I remember reading and hearing about Abdullah Ibrahim canceling his tour and people being unsure about whether they should, attend or not attend. And eventually the festival was canceled. So that must have been quite a difficult process for you guys. So I just wanted to ask, what was that like? How did it go? How has it been affecting you, basically?
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for having me on the panel, and I think this is a great environment. We should do it more often. Um, I got hit. Well, we got hit a week before the festival. I didn't have the chance to do 3 week planning. The chairman of our board, Dr. Survey, phoned up and said, "Guys, what do you think?" And our motto was "People before profits," and we knew this pandemic was real. And there wasn't any plan B, plan C, because we'd been monitoring, but we didn't really know if this thing was going to affect us. And we went into a serious mode of lockdown. And then it came to, like Mantwa and everybody else, and everybody else knows, was how do you face the general public who is saying you're alarmist? You guys are trying to use this as a publicity stunt. You should not have cancelled. I've done this, I've done that, and the rest. But as I said, the board decided with us to support the team to say this is not going to happen. I think it was the right decision as it proved, later.
And okay, we'll get into the details in a bit because there's a lot actually to flesh out. But let's get through to the other panelists, and I'll get back to you, Billy. Mantwa, if you could go next, you know, how did the immediate effects of the pandemic hit you guys at Joy of Jazz Festival last year? And how is that continuing into this year?
Yeah, with events like ours, and I think Billy and Alan can attest to that, you start planning the year before. So when we get to December, I know Billy has advertised already. May we advertise? So our plans are really, really right at the beginning of the previous year. So going back to artists and saying, you know, you can't do this. Some of them have started rehearsing. People have bought tickets, you know, to come down. Traveling has been planned. So the impact was very, very high and very dire, because now you're not only dealing with the musician, you're dealing with a technical company, you're dealing with a ticket shredder, you know, your sponsors, your partners, the fans out there that you needed to explain. I had my inbox full, people saying, you don't have to cancel. In September, all this will be gone and dusted with.
Yeah, I think the hardest part for everyone is the uncertainty, and that is what has kind of been so devastating, you know, especially in the arts industry, is this uncertainty of not knowing when things are going to bounce back. So you can never really make solid plans. Alan, I'm going to ask you to go next.
Evening, everybody. Thanks, Atiyyah. And Billy, you made a good point there about being accused of being alarmist. And you were the one who took the brunt first, but well done. I mean, looking back, it would have been crazy to have the Cape Town Jazz Fest, you know, the first super spreader event in South Africa. We, as Mantwa says, you know, everything's planned a year to 18 months in advance. So with the Standard Bank Jazz Festival in Makhanda, we had our whole lineup ready by March, ready to go, all the stuff written, this is who we're going to have, it's all perfect. And then watching Cape Town, and then suddenly everything shut down. So what we did was, we, as part of the virtual National Arts Festival, is that we took the South African component. Because one advantage of Makhanda is that we've got smaller venues, smaller things, and so actually a little bit more flexible. The Joburg and Cape Town, that's big scale stuff in terms of venues, numbers, etc., far more complex. So we took our South African musicians and we recorded 15 of those bands, but we recorded during level 5 and level 4 lockdown. So the simple practicalities of getting our crew, for instance, to Johannesburg to do the recordings, the protocols in place at the Market Theatre and at Artscape, the complexity of that stuff was very hectic to get 15 performances, very nicely recorded, but no audience as well. So the musicians did really well, but also performing in front of nobody and trying to get that vibe that you would normally have that is so critical in a festival. So in the end, it worked very well for us. In terms of, obviously not like normal, not as well as normal, but in terms of reach, actually we got, because it was international and anybody could watch it, suddenly we actually got to a lot more audience members than we have before, because you know, only a certain number of people can get down to Makhanda. But as we all know, the real problem is monetization online. And I was part of the World Jazz Conference in November last year, where it was so nice to hear, not nice, of course it's not a nice thing, but it was a relief to hear that everywhere, Australia, America, I know the Lincoln Center has had such a huge loss of income. And to hear in America, throughout Europe, all over the world, people are struggling. Unless you're Taylor Swift, how do you make money online? So that was our experience last year. I've got stuff about this year, but I'll leave that for later.
Sorry, Nikki. So I know that you had some tours planned. You had, you know, as somebody who works on various things, you had so many things organized. Could you speak about, you know, what was March and April, May, all of that? What did that look like for you last year?
Pretty catastrophic. So I was busy with a couple of tours of internationals coming into South Africa. a few sort of second visits by bands that have played here before from Switzerland, or collaborations from America. And the biggest one was definitely that Carnegie Hall was bringing their National Youth Orchestra for Jazz here for the first time, and for the first time to Africa. So it was pretty massive, and it was a huge machinery to get all of that together. And I was working very closely with Alan on that. And so, you know, and that involves, you know, 50 international flights and all the logistical arrangements that go with that. So, and it was just so touch and go. Nobody quite knew when to make a call, when is it safe, how long can we push for? Because yeah, nobody, I think, in their whole lives has ever thought that they would live through a pandemic. Maybe a tsunami, maybe a hurricane, maybe many other things, but that was pretty radical. And then obviously the fallout was that for every single artist or band that tours, and that is, you know, many artists, whether they're touring around South Africa, whether they're touring internationally, but to have that you know, whole avenue just decimated has really been pretty massive. And I've seen, you know, working closely with some South African artists who've gone from 10 to 15 gigs a month, whether they're small ones or big ones, they've gone to zero, and there's very little that they can do. People are as creative as possible, but that's really been pretty hectic. And I think it's also had a massive impact on the small little venues and the small little jazz hosts. And we'll have to see who survives that, because they make up, you know, a lot of those gigs. And I've just seen many places closed, shuttered. Last night I was in the center of Cape Town for the first time in a long time, and it was pretty scary to see all the venues that are closed. So yeah, so that's how it was for me.
Okay. Yes, I would imagine, Marlyn, maybe on a similar level, because you also you know, were involved with organizing various gigs. You involved with artist management as well. But and we have chatted briefly about this before. But if you could take us through, you know, because you also do PR for other festivals in Durban. So I just wanted to know how that was, you know, just the immediate effects.
Yeah, I think like for everyone in the industry, it was immediately very almost paralyzing, because you don't know what to do. And as I think event producers and festival producers, all we know what to do is get our hands together and do it. But we didn't know what to do anymore to make that change. And I think for me, especially, the ripple effect is just very devastating. You know, that you have to let go of stuff and stuff that actually phones you and at some point tells you, I can't buy my next meal. Can you help me? You know, and at some point you also don't know anymore where to find the funds to assist people. So I think that was and still is the most devastating for me. And then obviously looking at it as a economy as a whole, like when and how are we gonna pick up these pieces?
Yeah, so I remember last year I had I think it was around May, I had the opportunity to interview Abdullah Ibrahim, and he said that he was getting terrible messages when he pulled out of the festival. There were so many people who were so upset with him, and you know, he had to explain that, you know, he just couldn't travel and he just didn't want to take the risk. So I'm not sure, Billy, Mantwa, and Alan, or anybody on the panel, if you guys feel comfortable talking about numbers in terms of the loss experience last year, because yes, there are contracts that could not be, you know, contracts had to be canceled. There were flights, there's accommodation, all kinds of things. I don't know if you want to speak. Does anybody want to speak to that, or not really?
Oh, look, I don't think, and I think these panels should be very transparent. I think that's one thing that I've learned during this COVID thing, is that this cloak and dagger, and I'm going to tell you which artists I'm booking and I'm not doing, it's actually getting very tired at the moment, because I think unless we stand as a unit, like with this new Copenza thing that we formed, we're never going to have dialogue. Okay, parking that. We have to raise about 61 million rand to do the Cape Town International Jazz Festival. And Rashid Lombard and I used to slog to try and get that. Same as Peter Tladi, same as Solomon Guan. Every one of us have to try and raise money. So it's difficult. I think that we pay all our artists 50% up front. And we pay in US and we pay in rand. We pay the artist. And we, a week before, had paid everybody 50%. And even though it was force majeure in the end, because the government had decreed there will be no gigs, there's still the element that an artist is an artist like we are, needs to survive and needs to live. And we never recalled any of the money. Abdullah was one of the few, because he, because of his age and travel, had decided earlier. And that became such a weird thing. Alan, because, and Mantwa, sorry, Nikki and Mantwa, but, we're all in the same situation. And then you get told by people, man, why did you not look after Abdullah? I'm 69 years old. Abdullah's 109 years old. You know what I mean? He has the right to decide he's not going to travel, because coming out of New York, things were going on. And those were things behind the scenes that was happening. We've got 2,750 people we employ. And to say to them, guys, I'm sorry. The artists we had looked after, but the technicians and the Akis and the Gears and all these guys, we suddenly said, guys, we cannot help you out. We're in dire straits. Thank God our sponsors decided that they would try, because nobody knew how long this was going to last. They would stay with us. But after a year, even the sponsors started saying to me, hey, can you give me a date? I am not a prophet. I cannot prophesize. And I'm telling you right now, I represent the company, saying we're not going to be saying it's going to happen next year. We're not going to say it's going to happen in December. So how long will sponsors start saying, we'd like our money back? So that's a reality. International artists, some of them, PJ Morton, as one, informed me that, listen, I want to give your money back. I'm with Maroon 5. I want to do something else. I can't wait indefinitely. We don't know if it's going to happen. And I respected that. Sure. So I may waffle a bit here, but I want to internalize. I started the Jazz Fix so that South African artists, I could do an online series of old shows and showcasing the best. So it's sort of like a two-stage pass. You could see a show of 2017 of Judith Sepoom. Guess what? 0 support. And the comments that I got was, hey man, I want to see Gregory Porter. I want to see the international. We can see these artists anytime. Guys, it's a struggle out there for us as South Africans to deal with South Africans on any platform, because people are looking at us and thinking it's an abnormal situation we find ourselves in. So yeah. As I said, I may have waffled a bit there, but basically 2 years is going to be a long time. And soon our board of directors is going to have to look at it and say, guys, sorry, man, let's take a break and let's see if we can regroup after next year and see where it goes. And that's a reality.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Billy. I appreciate you sharing that. Again, coming back to that uncertainties that nobody can actually give you any kind of concrete day or figure or answer, because I did want to ask Mantwa and Ellen. Ellen, hey, your hand's up. Thank you. I did want to ask them, since there's still time for the festivals that they put on, what's going to be happening with that? I mean, there's so much that I would love to engage with everyone on in terms of, venues and online transitioning, but I just think we need to just get through what is actually possible. Is anything possible right now? And between Ellen and Mantwa, I would love to ask you, for the festivals this year, what have you decided?
Sure. Just to pick up on Billy's, Billy really did have the toughest one, because Billy, having had to pay 50% up front to musicians, which you then don't get back, is really difficult. So we had the advantage of being 3 or 4 months further down the line. Mantwa is another 2-3 months after us as well. And we also don't have those big ICC costs as well. For us, the big loser, I think, was Makhanda. Makhanda needs the tourists. The NAF brings in a lot of money into Makhanda. I would think that with Rhodes students away as well, I think that part of the country is suffering possibly more than we are as well. But from our side, what we've been really trying hard to do is the sustainability of our festival, which is part of the sustainability of an industry. So I've been working on this festival in Makhanda for the last nearly 30 years. I've been director for 21 years, and I've got a team that works with me, some of them for longer than I've been there, and they know the business very well. Now, you can't suddenly say to them, okay, well, sorry, can't use you this year, we'll pick you up next year, and hope that they're going to be there for you next year. Although there are not that many festival gigs to go to, but there are other things that people can do. So how do we as an industry keep people involved? And yes, Billy, your point about how long can sponsors keep on going? And that one certainly is a really, really key one that I spoke about, the monetization online. And clearly patrons and sponsors are essential in sustainability. We've been very lucky. Standard Bank has stuck with us. And they've stuck with us for this year as well. And I'm hoping that they continue with us. It's obviously very difficult for a bank that faces the challenges that they do, but we're very grateful that they are with us. And so what we're doing for this year is taking the same basic thing as last year of being online, because the National Arts Festival will be a combination of virtual. It's going to be a hybrid festival, a combination of virtual and in person. And in fact, the stuff hasn't been released, so I'm not going to tell you too much details about it. But there are going to be performances like mini festivals in Durban, Cape Town, Johannesburg, and then partially East London, partially Makhanda. And it does mean for us with the jazz that those bands that we recorded last year in a studio with just silence and the 7 crew feeling embarrassed to be clapping, and the musicians bravely saying, well, that was great, are at least going to have an audience. And in fact, that's where our students, because we're looking at the professionals, and we're looking at the youth as well, of how do we develop those young players who haven't been to a jazz gig in a year as well. So yes, at those performances, we'll be recording them, and students will be the audience. They're the best audience you can have. And we'll put that online. So there will be a Standard Bank Jazz Festival Makhanda this year, starting from July. I think it's going to be online for about 6 weeks, just like last year, but a better version, more of it as well. I've also made contact around the world, because we all around the world are in a similar position. And in fact, I've had a lot of responses around the world, particularly one of the angles we're including is youth bands. And for instance, there are 40 Swedish youth bands that would like to be part of our festival, because we're going to have a whole section of students, high school, university, and informal institutions who can submit their performances between 5 minutes and half an hour. And what they want to do is get a chance to put their stuff out there, but also to see what their peers are doing. So we're going to have our normal professional South Africans. We've got a bunch of foreign online performances. Plus we've got, in fact, what we're very excited about is that there are going to be 2 national bands again, the Standard Bank National Youth Jazz Band for universities and the Standard Bank National Schools Band for high school students. And in fact, the closing date for the online application is the 8th of May. And then we're going to, at these, in these centers, we're going to be doing live auditions from those who are good enough from the onlines. So yes, the idea is, how can we sustain, how can we give hope to young people who love jazz and can't see it live, and for many of them are not playing it live either. How can we give them a sense that things still are going and that they're going to carry on going later on as well? But at the same time, yes, how do we keep the whole machinery going? Because Billy, yours sounds dangerous. And again, you're the first one up for next year. You know, in March next year, if this thing hasn't cleared up, you can't miss 3 in a row. Mantwa, you also, the ICC costs, etc., are massive. But over to you, Mantwa.
Mantwa, sorry. Just unmute.
Okay, with us, and I think it's the same as with Billy, if you take a festival of a huge budget like that, open doors for a 50% audience, we're not going to make the money back. We might try and give the sponsors the return on investment, value-wise, but definitely the revenue is not going to be the same. So we have scenarios that we are really looking at. However, our budget is still high. So we either say we are going to have this event to stay relevant and in the people's eyes.
Yeah.
We will definitely lose the majority of our patrons who wants to go to a live show. I mean, if you look at the LMS of people that comes to our festivals, are mostly older people who want to sit at home and connect online, have a problem connecting with the broadband, and. In terms of artists, it's really a big struggle. And if you look at artists still calling you with a hope that, they can pitch their work, they can come and perform. Again, performing for a no audience a venue always becomes a problem. You can actually feel it that poor people, that artist is just on stage with, again, the technical team whistling and screaming and clapping hands, just to keep up the momentum.
So Mantwa, is that a no for this year?
Our plan for this year is, and again, we are still investigating and doing a whole lot of researches with going hybrid, and it will honestly depend on the capacities that we can put in, even if it's hybrid. And again, now we have to relook at our structures, the venues. We cannot use an ICC to host 100 people or 200 people. We have to now look at smaller venues and try to make it work. Will people, again, warm up? People get used to doing things the same way. If I was to go to ICC every year or SCC every year, and all of a sudden I have to hop around town, go into venues. So again, that will need a whole lot of marketing to change the mindsets of people that, you can have jazz in the city. We can go from venue to venue.
Yeah, I think, you all touched on things that are very important. One of them is, how do we, there's various things. Firstly, it's important to understand that South Africa still has this, inequality in terms of who has access to data, who doesn't. It's not a given that everybody has access and everybody can stream and has access to online, or even has that capacity. And I think we sometimes don't live in those worlds entirely, but it is a struggle, many times people need to be provided with data. So that's one thing. The second thing is when we're dealing with audiences who are elderly, they don't always feel comfortable going into public spaces if it's too crowded. So how do you deal with that? So there's quite a few issues that have come up in terms of looking at independent gigs. And I wonder, Marlyn, if you could speak about, with any of the events that you've organized since the pandemic has started, how have you approached that in terms of these things like safety, like ensuring that audiences feel, confident about coming out into a space?
We've actually done very, very little physical events. We've done a range of digital events, which we're happy to do at venues like the Playhouse, or record at places where all the safety measures are on point and there's no issue, because you just don't want to become the next person that's on the news as there was a super spreader event there, or you just don't want to go there. And I think at the same time, what breaks my heart is that you don't reach certain audiences, like what was said, but you also don't reach certain musicians anymore. We used to drive to corners of the province to have, to organize performance opportunities for certain artists. And those artists are not the artists that would come to the city and record, or it just all becomes more difficult. And then I think the second thing is also, I mean, in Durban, people started doing events now again. You know, there was that little lockdown gap. I think it was somewhere early December, November, where people bravely went out and did a bunch of gigs, and then everything went back on lockdown, and everyone got so disappointed that I felt it's taking a bit longer now for people actually to get started because of that fear. You know, everyone speaks of the third wave. When is it going to come? How can I plan against that? So we literally almost plan a concert that normally we would plan 6 weeks ahead of time. Now we would plan a week or 2 weeks ahead of time, just to be sure. And what's very interesting, I mean, there's been a lot of research done by the South African Cultural Observatory, Concerts SA, IKS, on musicians and the lack of opportunities for musicians. But what I would find also very interesting to see is consumer behavior. Do people actually come out? I mean, I've spoken to a number of venues that started doing gigs here again, where they used to have like 15, 20 people audience. And yeah, like Mantwa says, that's just not enough to make the money back that you've put in. So we become even more dependent on funders to run our venues and to run our places, which was already sometimes an unhealthy situation, I think, and at the moment that's just becoming worse. But it would be very interesting to see if it, because I feel part of our audiences, maybe not the jazz fanatics like that, but part of our audiences that we were trying to get into the gigs may now have, to say it very simply, bought a Netflix contract and are okay, subscription, and are okay to just sit at home. You know, we've all gotten comfortable a little bit with the situation at home. So I'm also very worried that, yeah, okay, cool. At some point we're all good to do our gigs again, but will people actually come, or have they just gotten comfortable with the situation of entertaining at home?
Nikki, I'm not sure if you want to add to that. Were you able to, in the last year or so, organize any events, and how did what did you need to do to ensure that you know went off well?
No, I wasn't able to organize any, and my experience of going to one or two has been desperate to go to a gig, like so many people, but also concerned because jazz particularly is a very sociable scene. People are desperate to see each other, so there is the potential for concerts to become super spread events, obviously with any kind of music, because people arrive, they've got a coffee or a glass of wine and they want to chat, and there's a perception that it goes away. So there is concern around that. But at the same time, the gigs I've been to, you know, people, the organizers have taken the precautions. The world has been living with this for a year now. People know how to wear a mask, how to sanitize, how to socially distance. And so they can only try and encourage people to do that so that things can carry on. But yeah, it is very concerning to see how it will continue. And just to mention something around the festivals and the whole ecosystem that we function in from a touring perspective, is that often the international artists coming out to South Africa, they hang their tour on a particular big festival, on managing to get us, on being programmed at one of those 3 big festivals in South Africa. So if, any of those festivals don't continue or have a longer pause than anybody knows about or thinks, that could also have an impact on how many internationals we'll see coming back into South Africa, because they play a very, very important role in being able to support financially a certain part of internationals' tours. So yeah, that's another concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think related to that is something I wanted to extend to all of you, because I don't know on this part of in terms of this part. Have you heard, of course, whether the festival or the gig goes on is dependent on various things, but in general, has there been more of a willingness from artists to travel? because travel is also one of the elements that affects the way a tour happens, the way a gig happens, the way the festivals happen. And then obviously with the borders being closed, that was a sure no, that there wasn't even a question about that. But now, I mean, especially Mantwa and Billy, a lot of the, and even Ellen with the Standard Bank festival that happens in, not the youth one, but the other one, there's a lot of international artists coming from Europe. Have you heard anything from anyone about the willingness to travel or the willingness to come to South Africa?
Mantwa, if I may. America's put restrictions on travel. As much as artists want to come out, they're saying you cannot travel, same as Europe. We red, blue, black, I don't know what label we've got in our country at the moment. So it's a no-go zone coming out from their side. Then not being able to say to them, look, we are going to host a festival. We have all these things in place. Everything's fine. Come on board. It's normal. That's not going to happen until next year. So the artist management know that. And as long as now, I think America and Europe have opened sort of a passage soon with this vaccinations. So I think they'll be starting to tour a lot more because they can go via this passage. Whereas we still a no-go zone. And artists that I've spoken to said, we'd love to come, but our management has said, no, sorry, not until you clear. So yeah, it's a catch-22.
If I can just respond as well, the Mantwa and Billy with the Cape Town and Joy of Jazz festivals have got a very different system, and I really, my sympathies, because you can't move those massive organizations, those massive stages, etc. And also it's predicated to quite an extent on big international names as well. And Billy, as you say, South Africans sometimes are saying, but we want to see Gregory Porter, but actually you can't afford to, and you can't make it work on small numbers. We are lucky that we are smaller, and so what I explained about what we're doing this year, and part of it is actually moving to where the musicians and the audiences are as well. So actually our plan, because the other part about travel is not just international travel, but within South Africa. And in fact, what we're trying to do at the moment is to set up as far as possible that the recordings in Cape Town are of musicians who are already in Cape Town and Johannesburg and Durban, etc. Because nobody wants to get onto planes and do the normal thing. You can't just, who shuttles people around, all that complexity that we normally organize as a festival, we're actually not in a position to do. So in many ways, going back to what I said about the survival of these systems, and it was a nice comment from Nikki about the ecosystem. And there's this whole lot of stuff that works off each other, and we've somehow got to keep it in place at a smaller scale, like a skeleton, until we can make it, we can carry on going. The Cape Town and Joy of Jazz offer us something like North Sea Jazz. Well, you go to Rotterdam, and there's this massive festival with 2 stages of 10,000 people on each. It's an incredible experience, and it might well be that can carry on going next year. But we're going to be a while still before we can offer that. But we do want to be able to offer it after this thing is finished. And there is a risk if you don't keep the skeleton in place of that being something that falls away from South Africa. And those skills are not easy to just say, okay, well, you used to run a festival, can we do it again now in 2 years' time? If you don't keep that team together, it's dangerous. So somehow we've got to get that skeleton, keep that skeleton in place, and do small things in the meantime.
Okay, Mantwa.
For the hybrid plans that we have sent out a feeler or an email to an artist to ask, would you like to come? Of course, artist wants to make money. They will then have to go to ask management and whoever is handling them. And I can tell you now, about 4 or 3 came back and say, can we try in 2022 or 2023? However, at the hindsight, we have to have a recovery plan, not only for us, but for the artists in South Africa. Again, we have audience that says, I want to see Gregory Porter. You see, so we are actually in a very difficult situation where we'll have to convince the patrons that if we have the festival in full scale, I think in years to come, we will have to, drop those percentages. I know we all do 30% international and 70 home. We are going to end up with 10% international and 90% home artists, so that they can also recover. The industry can also pick up.
Well, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We've got more than enough talent locally here that needs platforms. There's no music like South African jazz out there, so it would be great to see audiences support more local, but also help add a more add to this discovering what is a South African identity and what does that mean in terms of sound. But there's a few things, and we have just about 20 minutes left. So what you guys have already touched on briefly about online, but I have spoken to quite a few people who are just, because of this element of jazz being a sound that is rooted in the idea of call and response, that the audience forms such a big part of these performances. On the one hand, hybrid models and online models are used, because it's a way to support the artist, it's a way to reach a global audience, it's a way for the show to go on. But some people, are just completely against attending any performances, especially if it's one-off gigs. What also ends up happening in the process of this is that a new archive is kind of created, whereas before we weren't documenting every single performance. I remember Sisonke 20's performance from the Standard Bank Jazz Festival last year. It was one of the first things I could see. It was beautiful. I was beautifully shot as well. But it was sad because it was such an important moment for him as, Young Artist of the Year. And I wished I could have been there for him, So I think that there is still a resistance to online. Personally, that's the way I feel. But I would love to hear some of how you guys feel about it. For instance, in terms of theater, the Fugard in Cape Town shut down recently because they were waiting for vaccine rollout. And the Baxter, after a series of interviews I did with them, were against doing any kind of online streaming of shows or theater performances. So everyone does, I realize there's no consensus in this thing. Everyone is doing what works for them, and it's kind of very hard to put together one particular answer. But if anybody wants to comment on that, I would love to hear all of your thoughts on this. Billy, I'm going to just go straight to you since your hand's been up.
Okay, sorry. Guys, I think we're missing a valuable point here, and that just struck me. We're putting so much attention on the international artists. Why don't we, every crisis there's an opportunity. Why aren't we looking as promoters how we can appease the South African audience, how we can look at our own artists and say, hey, why don't I put somebody with an orchestra? Why do not somebody playing with African instruments? Why don't we make it interesting back here? Instead of always depending on the Michael Jackson syndrome of if you're American, you're great, if you're European, you're great. Why don't we look at what we have and rethink the way we stage, and how do we get to our audiences and say to them, guys, because I have incredible respect for South African audiences, and I will carry that flag all over. So yes, I was one of the few at the beginning, speaking about the international, only because that's the response I'm getting. But why don't we, Alan, Mantwa, and guys, Nikki, and why don't we turn this around and say, what do we have in South Africa? Why don't we make it exciting? Why don't we do collaborations? Why don't we get to see Sho Majozi with an orchestra? I'm just an example, and do something that's exciting. It will bring people back. And the other thing is, we look at internal tourism, where we're saying, guys, can you travel to Limpopo, go and see KwaZulu-Natal? While you've got a chance and you can't travel overseas, travel through South Africa, sorry. And I think we should be doing this with our musicians and really show respect to South African. And as promoters and directors of music, get together and say, hey, guys, bounce something together and see how we can showcase Sho Majozi, how we can do Tandizwe, how we can do these artists. And I'm sure we're going to reach an audience soon where people are going to say, oh, it'll be great to see Gregory Porter, but I'm going to watch Tandiswa next week because she's playing with Wara Wara Wara, you know what I mean? And really make it exciting, because it's very easy for me to turn around and say, well, hey, because the internationals aren't coming, there won't be any shows. Wrong. We have 75% South African and 25% international. So put the 25 aside, make the best 75 we can, and produce shows that will bring people back. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but also show respect to our artists, because we stand back for no one. Just my thought. I thought maybe something that we can produce. And we with Capenza, Peter Tladi, and we all, as you know, we're all together. Let's get together as a society, as a group, and let's talk and see how we collectively can do something that's going to bring back the audience, because Cape Town Jazz is not going to do it on its own. Mantwa is not. Alan, you not. Nikki, no one's going to do it on its own. Collectively, we can actually stand strong and make a difference. I know that I may have preached a bit there, but I mean, I think that's where we want to go going forward. Hope my point came across.
Amen to that. I hope that this conversation continues beyond this panel discussion. It's not always ideal to have a Zoom panel where you can't really be around people and, look them in the eye directly. There's a whole bunch of faces floating around me. But I do think that it's really, really important, because at the end of this is the artists, and the artists have been the ones struggling the most during this time, due to the complete lack of support, the mismanagement of public funds, and also the lack of platforms. So I really hope that continues. Nikki, you had your hand up, and then I'm going to go to Alan. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to respond to your question around the live streaming, but just obviously to respond firstly to Billy, is like, absolutely, we have to find ways, we have to continue to be creative in our engagement with audiences, and our engagement with artists. We have to keep building the relationship. We have to keep, nurturing the love of the music. And if it's not live in the exact same space right now, we've got to just keep looking at alternatives. It's how the arts have survived for many, many years, and well, for centuries and eons, really. So we've just got to figure that out. And around the live streaming thing, I think it's quite interesting. I think obviously people are fatigued. For example, I don't want to have a whole day of Zoom meetings and working on my computer and then watch a jazz concert. But if you'd asked me to go to a gig, I totally would have been there. So I think there's that kind of thing where people are fatigued no matter how much they want to support. And it was exciting in the beginning, and it's no longer so exciting. But I think the silver lining that and the really interesting thing that's happened is the upskill of video quality that has happened so quickly. Suddenly, artists have a 3-camera shoot and video of their performance with quality sound that they are able to share, whether it's in that live moment or later with audiences. And those audiences can be all across the world and in South Africa. So I think that's really, really interesting, because it opens other doors, because the other part of things that I'm interested in is the touring of South African artists internationally. So if nobody's ever seen them, then how do they know that they want them? But now if they have the quality of their audio music, and also they can be seen in a performance context, I think that creates some quite interesting possibilities internationally. And I think in South Africa, the quality issue with data, that's also very, that is very challenging, but things are getting cheaper a lot of the time. And I think people are finding ways to access. So if we can also tap into that and see how to, I don't really like the word, but how to exploit that to the best ability so that more and more people have access. Yeah, I think there's a lot of possibilities there. But the other challenge to mention is just attention span, because the more people have been out of a live space, the more they've kind of lost their ability to engage over a solid chunk of time with music. People are on their phones, they're doing different things. So I think that is a little bit of a challenge from a streaming perspective as well, is to try and recreate the holistic entirety of the experience and the communion, really, between artist and audience.
To respond quickly to Billy's comment about the international and the South African, I think it's something that we all know as well. Last year, Billy, you couldn't have Jacob Collier, but we could. It was quite a wild thing that, actually just at the last minute, we realized that Jacob Collier would be the most ideal person for online. And he started his gig with this really lovely reham of Nkosi Sikelele, which was very beautiful. But out of what was really interesting to us was in terms of tickets sold, and of course the tickets were available around the world, he didn't come close to the sales we got of South African artists, and that people actually want to hear South Africans. But again, monetization, those sales are not sufficient to make the thing work online, but it is still a way. To come back to my point, we are improving things. I'm not convinced we're finding a sustainability online, but Atiyyah, to come back to your point about Sisonke, one of the things that we wanted to do with the festival last year and again this year is that so many musicians in South Africa don't have a quality product that they can sell themselves around South Africa to audiences and particularly to overseas. So we had the dilemma of how much do we put online afterwards on YouTube, and actually what we ended up with is saying, okay, to each musician, because it's no good us putting the entire gig online for free afterwards, because then why would you buy a ticket next time?
Sure.
But at the same time, we want really good quality stuff of Sisonke out there that a Swedish promoter who hears about Sisonke checks him online and, oh, actually that guy can play, and that's a nice sound. So part of our thing was marketing South African jazz. And we hope that in the long term, because actually, Billy, it's what you're doing as well, by putting out that stuff with with quality South African recordings, visual promoters they want to see, who does this person interact with here? How do they look on stage? It's not just that's a nice sound, but what are they doing here? So we're hoping that we can extend that as well and give opportunities to South African musicians.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a lot of questions still. Thank you so much for everybody's such great, thoughtful answers. We've got 7 minutes left, and there is one question from Nikki Schreier that I want to get to. I think another point that came up, which we might not get to discuss, is a lot of people I've spoken to in doing research for this panel have wondered why were outdoor spaces, especially during summer, not utilized more, since those were probably, even for festivals, those are probably the spaces that audiences will feel the most safest in, whether it's independent gigs or big, bigger performances. Then the other question is the government's restrictions on how many people are allowed in a space. So I'm not sure that has changed. The last time it was 50% the size of the venue. And then, these are some of the things that I wanted to talk about. But there is something about, creating the South African archive, because, for instance, I used to work at a jazz club in Cape Town called the Mahogany Room, and there were some mind-blowing performances that happened there on a nightly basis, but so many that weren't captured, whether it's just audio or by video. And that is part of our archive. That is the thing that 40 years from now, we're going to look back on. So somewhere there, the online recording process allows for that archive to be built. Okay, Nikki Schreier's question. I'm just going to, where did it go? There it is. A question for Mantwa, Billy, Alan, and Alan. How much new programming are you able to do for 2022, or are you needing to book artists who are on your 2020 and 2021 lineups?
I'll give a quick answer that we started from scratch. We called for nominations a while ago, and we haven't finalized our lineup. Everything is I've used Rhodes University's very sensible watermark over all documentation that they send out, which just says fluid. Things are constantly fluid. But yes, we've tried to start from scratch. But one of the problems is that musicians, by not getting out there, by not being able to play gigs, are not necessarily doing new collaborations, and it's difficult for everybody. What's the latest thing that Shane Cooper is doing? And just not to pick on Shane Cooper, but as an example, can he get it out there? Do we know what's happening, etc.?
If I may respond as well, I think we're obligated to answer, and I think I text to Nikki. We're obligated by contract to artists who we are paid 50%, and to just leave that, we can't. So what we've done is our program for next year would be the same. as I said, until the artists say, look, we can't wait anymore. Yeah, so our programming will have to stay the same. They have been paid 50% up front, and so we're still in contract with 98% of our artists.
Okay, cool.
We also have an obligation to, to service those contracts. However, going forward, we're looking at having, to change concepts with artists, those collaborations, something new, something that an artist hasn't, artists are taking guitars and selling shows online. We can't have the same thing when we get back. So we have to really, really be creative together with the artists and say, what is it that we can do? What is it that people haven't seen you doing that can sell those tickets?
Okay, so yeah, we have just about 3 minutes left. I don't think there's enough time to get into any deep discussions, but I do want to say that I think that there's a big need for this kind of panel to happen on a regular basis, not just once a year, or after such a traumatic experience, such as the pandemic affecting every one of our lives and jobs. So I hope that we can do this. I'm very thankful that we were able to gather today, and I hope that we can do this again. Apologies that I didn't get as much questions as I wanted to out. But I really thank you for your time, and I do look forward to seeing you at a live performance or an online performance sometime soon. We will take either one at this point. As music lovers, we do not take for granted the work that you guys do, and you put, all that effort that's put into the behind the scenes work, the organizing, the payment, and the looking after artists. It's important. And I think that me personally, when I started attending online gigs, it was because I really, really wanted to support the musicians. So yeah, I'm going to say thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you for making time. And all the best with everything that you have planned coming up. And stay safe through this time.